Hello folks and welcome to the Totally Tanked podcast. My name is John. This is episode 5. It is the 24th of November 2019. I'm joined in the pod by the king of world of tanks, Rob.
Maybe the queen of world of tanks. I'm not that good. In fact, I'm really not that good. But yes, Rob is here and we're here to talk about a French tank this week, the AMX13.
Cool. Now, I just want to quickly note, we've got a theme music for the first time.
Thanks to Luke McGrath.
Thank you to Luke McGrath. Thank you very much, who is, it turns out, not only a very talented musician, but a keen listener to this podcast. So, AMX13, 7,700 of these French light tanks built.
Yep. They're designed in 46 and started producing from 52 through to 1987 and still in use today.
Only by people who can't get a better tank.
There are lots of people in the world who can't get a better tank, yes. Look, and you're right, 7,700 built either domestically by the French or exported overseas and built in Argentina. Now, besides the big US and Russian tank factories, this is one of your most mass-produced tanks in the Western world. You know, I mean, I'm sure the Chinese and probably Koreans and Japanese might have a few here and there, but they're also buying.
Koreans and Japanese are quite small runs.
Yeah, but the only other tanks that come close is your Leopard. It's between the Leopard 1 and the Leopard 2. They also built around 7,700. The British tanks is nowhere even close. So this is one of your biggest mass-produced tanks, not built by the Russians or the Americans.
And almost no one knows who it is.
What do you mean?
Well, sorry, almost no one knows what this tank is.
No, exactly right. Yeah. It's not, because it doesn't. It's not your big MBTs, the main battle tanks to fight the Russians or the US through the flat plains of Poland and the steppes of Russia or anything like that. This was a light reconnaissance tank built by the French in order to fight small wars, bush wars, anti-colonial wars, or
Colonial wars,
that sort of thing.
French were more into colonial wars than anti-colonial wars.
Yeah, the tank fought didn't really distinguish because it fought on both sides.
Yeah. Now, quickly, the cultural impact of this tank is surprisingly light for such a huge run tank. It did have some big implications in that it was the very first autoloader in a tank, and we'll get to more of that. It was a rather unpopular autoloader in many ways. It did lead to the still very much in production SK105 Cuirassier, spelt with a K, which is an Austrian jobby. And in a lot of ways, particularly the oscillating turret design, did lead to the Striker M1128 mobile gun system, which the Americans use, which is an 8-wheeled jobby that is also famous for its propensity to roll over if they try and go around corners with the turret turned.
Right. bit top heavy, as you say.
Yeah. Okay. Also, if they turn the turret sideways and fire the gun, it's at some risk of rolling over. It rolls over a lot, as far as I can tell. There's a lot of problems with trying to put a 105mm gun on a light armoured vehicle. Problems which, mind you, the MX13 also got to, due to being a very light tank. The name MX13 comes from, it was 13 tons dry weight as built, although it mostly went into combat in the 14-15 ton range.
As I said, look, it had a big impact in a lot of small wars that we in the West don't hear about. All right, essentially anywhere in Africa or South America during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and even Southeast Asia. And South Asia and India and Pakistan, it was a tank that fought battles. Right, a lot of your American tanks, they didn't see a lot of action. Right, but
some export models, but your point's well taken. That and these things, because of the French. Well, for a start, you buy French gear generally when you can't, for whatever reason, get better gear. I mean, the Israelis
or the Yanks won't sell it to you, or the Yanks and the English won't sell you something good, so you buy off the French.
Also, the French are really, really good at paying your politicians vast sums of money into numbered Swiss bank accounts in exchange for contracts. The French are the world leaders at that. And as a result, a lot of ill-advised arms contracts come up.
Which is also a reason why they have a lot more territories. We're not calling them colonies anymore.
They're all part of metropolitan France.
That's right. They're all territories of France.
They're as French as Paris.
Which is and the populace still has to provide military service to France.
Yeah, although rarely in the place they're from because they're not that silly.
But that's one of the reasons why they have a decent rugby team.
Yes, there are a few reasons. Now let's get into some stats on the AMX, the good old technical specs. As discussed, 13 tonnes empty, more around the 15-tonne.
Three-person crew?
Three-person crew, so the autoloader meant they did away with the gunner. Now, let's maybe now's a good time to tackle the oscillating turret.
Yes, one of the first designs of its kind.
Now, oscillating literally means movement back and forth in a regular rhythm. And when you first hear oscillating turret and you know what the word oscillating means, you go, well, all turrets oscillate. What are they on about? But the issue here is...
It's two hinge rather than one spinny roundy turret with a barrel that goes up and down.
Yeah, so essentially what they did is, because when you try and put a big gun in a small turret, you either get terrible elevation, which is what the Russians ended up with their super sexy slimline turrets where the bloody enormous 125mm cannon breech has nowhere to move inside the turret.
It has a decline of 5 degree decline and 10 degree elevation.
Even that's technical, and reality can be far worse than that, which is why cranky old Centurions beat the hell out of sexier Russian models in 1973.
Oh, that's because they're at the top of the hill.
Or at the bottom of a hill. But Centurions can fire up and down, and Russian tanks don't really have that. So they overcame that by, there's the spinny bit of the turret, and then the whole top half of the turret with the gun bolted into it, and the tank commander and the gunner goes up and down, which must be a little disconcerting for the tank commander, I would imagine.
Well, the main thing is it's all one piece. So
the top half of the turret is all one piece.
The top half of the turret is all one piece, so it means you've got a lot more stability, whereas in other modern tanks with the barrel sticking straight back into the turret, the barrel moves around, and so that'll be what's moving around inside the turret, and you've got to make room for that.
Yeah. And if you fail to make room for it, you will lose a large part of your body.
Yeah.
Possibly your chest.
Yes. But with the oscillating turret, everything's fixed in place, which is why they could have the
autoloader.
Yeah.
Yes. This is a classic French engineering case where they've seen a very specific problem and they've come up with a brilliant solution that does solve that problem, but then introduces a whole bunch of other quite terrible issues.
Yes, it's still a good application overall for what they were trying to achieve. Right? Just remember, so it's got two hinge parts. It's got a highly placed gun, small turret, so you've got to save a lot of weight. You can now fit an autoloader because the turret and the barrel are in one piece. However, you do get two weaker joints, so the shot trap areas are much worse.
They're incapable of being nuclear, biologically, chemically shielded because they've essentially got a hole in the turret.
Yep.
Now, admittedly, that's high-intensity conflict, and these were really never used in... Oh, that's not true. They were used in some high-intensity conflicts, but most of their usage was well outside of that. But essentially, the turret was not what a turret is usually, which is the strongest part of the tank. The turret was quite weak.
Yes.
But nothing was heavily armored in this tank.
But you had a great big gun on a little tank, which was fast. Right?
Yes.
So one of the reasons why I picked this tank was because in World of Tanks that I play, I keep getting killed by these little bastards as they zip around the battlefield and blowing the crap out of you with their autoloader, and then zip off and run away to reload, and then come back and do it again. You're just going, and you cannot hit them because your turret traverse isn't fast enough to keep up with their turret traverse and their mobility. So
in World of Tanks, this is an excellent tank.
It is certainly in the hands of a good driver. Yes, it's got to be a good driver. But other things, so it's got, as I said, it's got a big gun on a little tank. It's fast. It's manoeuvrable. Now the French versions didn't have a stabilizer, so you can't put a beer on the end of your tank like you can with the Leopard, and the end of your barrel like you can with the Leopard, and drive around and shoot it. But
I don't think it's good for the beer.
No. So the French couldn't do that, but it did have a lot of benefit, a lot of things. Now, as we're saying, it goes at 60 k's an hour. It's got a 400 kilometre range. It's got two 6-shot autoloaders on it, so
basically two revolver setups on either side of the gun, so they sort of take them in turns.
And it fires every 5 seconds, so we can get off 12 shots around, and then it drives away.
And again, as with our friend the Ontos, which we discussed last week.
I was about to say, there's a lot of similarities between this and the Ontos.
And they did actually fight each other.
Yes, they did.
As we
And
discussed last week.
And the Ontos won.
Ontos is the clear winner. Because in terms of, it's an interesting one in terms of design theory. 12 rounds seems better than the 6 which you get with the Ontos. The advantage with the Ontos is you could literally fire all 6 in the space of 2 or 3 seconds.
But if you're moving on the Ontos and you fired all 6, you get blown over backwards.
True. And one of our listeners, who I would suggest, just to briefly go back to the Ontos from last week, who appears to know a thing or two about Ontoses, noted that you do not want to stand behind an Ontos when it's firing.
No, they blow the bricks off the building and behind you.
Yeah.
Yes. That's the whole point of the recoilless rifle is that the recoil goes somewhere backwards.
It does. But we had spoken about how they'd keep the hatches open basically for the heat, but it meant you could communicate. But his point was that you had to be so far away that it was hard to communicate with.
Backblast danger area.
Yeah.
So as we used to call out, BBDA clear. That means there's nobody standing behind you as you're about to fire off your recoilless whatever.
Yeah, okay. But mind you, muzzle braked artillery and the AMX13 often had muzzle brakes on its variants. There is also a great deal of danger with the flash from muzzle brakes for nearby.
Yes, so that's out the front though.
Yeah.
Not out the back.
No. Still dangerous though.
Right, so we're saying 37 rounds in the tank, 12 in the turret, and I think we didn't actually mention it before that once you fire those 12 rounds, you then drove off, and the the co-driver
has to get out.
Outside of the tank and start reloading those cylinders. So that's how long ever it takes for him. That's a shitty job as you're standing around the outside and hoping that nobody's lining you up with some sort of other shot.
Yeah.
Thin armour, all right? So you have a
paper thin armour.
40 mils on the front and the turret, and the front of the turret, and about 10 to 25 everywhere else. So the front of your tank might take a 50 cal shots, but anything over that, or a little bit bigger, but not much. And the sides, well, John and I have been debating whether or not you could take any small arms fire from the sides.
We're talking 10 millimeters of armour, which is not.
The big question is, will an AK or a M16 go through it?
I would not bet my life against a assault rifle round not penetrating 10 millimeters. I reckon you're going to have some spalling as well.
Yeah, possibly.
So smaller than that, submachine guns, you're probably okay against those. But not designed to be shot at.
No, it's not.
It's more a shoot. It's a glass cannon.
Yeah, it is, and that's the whole point. It's a reconnaissance, what they call a reconnaissance tank. It's not just going out and spotting the enemy. It's going out, spotting the enemy, firing off you 12 shots, and then running like hell to get out of there again. All right, so you engage or ambushing. You ambush from a concealed place. You got a low profile. It's only about 8 feet tall. You got the turret. The gun is very high on the turret, so you can hide it behind a nice berm. And with that, the only thing sticking over the top. And suddenly, bang, 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 bang. There's 12 shots, and then you're bugging off out of there at 60 k's an hour.
Yeah, the height was 7 foot 9 inches. Just looking at the stats. You're pretty close. I'm just saying it is a low slung tank. Also, because it's got barrel restraint, which is this, like a triangle at the front of the tank that holds onto the gun when it's not in use, it looks a lot like self-propelled artillery.
Yes, and well, that's one of the other things. It's been adapted so many different ways because they said, well, this chassis can go anywhere, do anything. Let's see what else we can chuck on the top of it. So they've been made into Scouts, Arties, so they have been made into self-propelled guns.
They have, yep.
Even APCs, for God's sakes. Bridge layers, missile-capable anti-aircraft, and recovery vehicles. So it was an adaptable, like the venerable M113 APC, which Australia and everybody else in the world has done something with.
Yeah.
It's a chassis you can whack anything on top of, and away you go.
Yeah, now the gun on this has changed through its life, starting with a 75mm up to the big guns of the more modern AMX13s, which is 105mm.
And the 90s was the first big change, and that basically brought them on par with the other tanks of the 50s and 70s, whereas the 75 was real World War II era gun turret.
And even then, it was only good against a World War II medium tank, which is going to be pretty anemic by the time this was entering service in the 50s. But yes, now in terms of what it could handle, ground clearance of 15 inches, could cross a trench 1.6 metres wide, climb an obstacle. We're talking feet or meters or inches. I'll go back to inches.
60 centimetres.
But 26 inches height of obstacle, 60-degree side slope, or ford 24 inches of water in a river.
Yeah, see, this was not a tank for running across the steppes of Russia where you had lots of rivers that you had to swim across or anything like that. It was a tank designed to drive really fast down the road, get to where it's going, fire off 12 shots, turn around, and drive really fast back along that road.
You've made that point a few times, but my point here is I think a Toyota Hilux could cross more difficult ground than this tank. And in fact, often in the world of armoured vehicles, I had reason to muse on this when I did a project on the Bushmaster, the mobility vehicle. For its $500,000 price tag, more once you throw in the extras, it really doesn't do a lot that a Bushmaster does, that a Toyota Hilux doesn't do.
It's the mine protection.
Yes, I get it does have it's more survivable, although an AMX13 is not that survivable.
No.
You do sort of wonder at what point you're better off just putting a rocket launching pod on the on a Toyota Hilux and
well, unless you're getting somebody to drive that remotely and then fire it remotely, the guys inside it kind of really want some protection.
They do, but my point is I don't think they're getting that protection from your
not from the AMX13, but from the Bushmaster. I mean, you remember this was built back in the days when tank crews were expendable because they'd just come out of World War II and saying, well, we need something to win with. And look, getting onto that, it was designed in 46, started building in 52, and what they were trying to build was they emphasised the firepower and mobility. Exactly the situation that lost them the World War II when the Nazis came through the forests of northern France with their blitzkrieg, because they had fast, light tanks with high mobility and good communications. So once again, and the French were fighting heavy tanks that were very stationary because they were fighting the last war in World War II, and again they built a tank that was going to fight the last war rather than the next war, where everybody else was going for these big MBTs, even medium tanks that could do a lot of work. They were building small tanks, high mobility, big guns, but nobody else really was. However, they found a market for it. 25 other countries were sold the AMX13, and they even got a license to build them in Argentina, and they provided them all around the world. And they're still in use, as I was saying.
Yeah, they are. Obviously you're more enthusiastic about the AMX than I am, but we'll get into service history in just a second. I will also note that I've seen something researching this tank I've never seen before in my life, which is a Wikipedia page with an animated GIF.
Well, there you go.
Because it tries to explain how the oscillating turret works.
Okay,
It's got a little animation. So I'm not saying there are no other animated GIFs on Wikipedia. Who would ever know everything that's on Wikipedia? But I've spent a lot of time on Wikipedia, and it's my first animated GIF there. All right, I'm just going to take a second, and we'll be back with service history. So the service history of the AMX-13, it fought in the Suez Crisis. Intriguingly, it was mainly used by the Israelis in the Suez Crisis, but the Egyptians had upgunned their Shermans with AMX-13 turrets, which
is strange because the French were upgrading their AMX-13s with Sherman turrets.
Chaffee turrets.
Well, that was part of the Sherman
yes.
family of tanks.
Yeah. That must have made enemy, target identification quite exciting.
It's got a weird and wacky. As I said before, the French shipped it off to lots of different locations in Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and a lot of these places suddenly went through various civil wars, revolutions, anti-colonial uprisings.
Now, did the war start because they had the tanks, or did they buy the tanks because the war was coming? Probably they bought the tanks because the war was coming.
I think it's the French's fault, whatever the reason.
Oh, yeah. Well, once the political...
And even the Belgians. So they sold a bunch to the Belgians, and so when their colonies started going, their tanks were shipped over to those places. The AMX13 was the first tank sold to the Israelis, because nobody else was selling to the Israelis at that point in time.
They were using old Shermans until that point.
No, not even that. So, sorry, they must have captured those from somebody else, but nobody had sold them anything.
Yeah.
The AMX13 was the first tanks that had been sold up until about 56.
We will get to Israeli use of the AMX13, don't you worry. Moving on through the wars, though, the Algerian War, where the French quite liked the fact that a reasonably light tank could get up into the hills, basically it was more the mobile machine gun they were after than anything else.
And faster than whatever US tanks were wandering around in the Civil War there as well. Yeah.
Now, a thing called the Sand War, which I probably need to do more research on because I thought I knew me wars, and that's
I'm going to guess Western Sahara?
Maybe. The 1958 Lebanon crisis, not the last time it fought in the Lebanon. The Vietnam War.
South Vietnam, yes.
Yeah, the Cambodian Civil War, of which is agreed the less said the better. Probably again with French legacy, I'm guessing there. The Dominican Civil War, where it got twatted by Ontosses, which I doubt there's anything more humiliating for a class of tank. The Indo-Pakistani War of 1965, where all the AMX-13s were obliterated. The Six-Day War, which in general you think of as a slashing triumph of Israeli arms, where dudes in jeeps with basically Toyota Hiluxes as weapons, but jeeps, were charging through the desert surrounding Arab formations, except for the AMX-13s, which got so badly mauled that the Israelis immediately sold them all. The Western Sahara War, don't know if that's the Sand War Mark II, the Lebanese Civil War, and the Guatemalan Civil War. So that's, quite a track record.
And all the
hell of a lot of police actions as well.
I was about to say, mercenary activities in Africa.
Yeah, there were mercenary units equipped with these things.
The French were quite happy to sell to people with, what's that word? The non-selling buddy agreement, whatever.
Oh, you've got to have end-user agreements.
That's the one, yeah. Eulers for tanks, but...
Yeah, look, I think, particularly a lot of these mercenary companies were essentially working for the French government, which might have something to do with the tanks turning up in their service.
Mexico still got 400 of them?
Yeah, although they've mostly adapted them to other uses. They're SPGs in Mexican service. Where they are useful is in ambush, where they've got their large gun and they're small tanks. They're quite easy to hide. But ambush is not always.
Ambush is murder and murder is fun, as the saying goes.
Yeah, but also ambush is something you only can really get into when you're losing the war and you're on the retreat, because the enemy keeps advancing into you. Yes, it can be useful, but if you're doing a lot of it, it probably means things aren't going great.
True.
I'm thinking Germany on the Eastern Front from 1943 onwards. So, as mentioned, the Egyptians fitted old Shermans with AMX-13 turrets. Indonesia has 500 of them, which, again, when you're trying to put things onto car ferries to move them around islands, a 60-ton tank is going to be a big problem. It's funny because islands lead to dwarfism in animals and even in humans. We are animals at the end of the day. Sorry, creationists. But it also the
logistics required.
The logistics of island warfare do.
We don't all have a Marine Battalion hovercraft attack ships to race our M11, our main battle tanks up onto the beach. For us.
The Indonesians don't have any hovercraft at all that I'm aware of. They might have a couple hidden around somewhere, but they do have tens of thousands of car ferries for moving cars between all their islands. As we said, a 60-ton main battle tank is going to be a huge problem on a car ferry. Like, that's a lot of planning. You probably can't have anything else on the ferry. And if you had a choice between 4 AMXs or 1 MBT, you'd have to think long and hard and really war game that out, wouldn't you?
Short term, I'd much rather have the 4 because they can be in 4 different places, whereas the MBT can only be in 1.
Yes. Now, the Indian AMXs, as we mentioned, all died in the Indo-Pakistani War of 1965. The Battle of Chawinda was the place where an Indian general tried to think his... And this is why we're going to get to why light tanks are a bad idea. Generals will invariably, despite all their training and their knowledge, and despite how you can go on and on about how these things are okay if they're used the right way, they will always end up being used as if they're a tank because they look like a tank.
Maybe that was the saving grace of the Ontos, is that because it didn't look like a tank and there was no doctrine for it, they didn't apply it as a tank. Whereas, I think it looks like, you're right, it does look like a tank. Nowadays, scout and reconnaissance vehicles don't look like a tank because a lot of them have wheels.
They still end up getting used like tanks at a pinch, and they perform as... simply because they're not designed. They're not. They're
not there. They should be bullies at the battlefield of only taking on smaller things like infantrymen with rifles, rather than any sort of other medium or main battle tank.
Yeah, well, support vehicles. I mean, I think 75% of all tank engagements ever were against non-tank targets. It might even be higher than that.
Because if you can take out the enemy's support and logistics train, then they're buggered as soon as they've run out of petrol.
Yeah, I mean, it's at the same token, air warfare is all about bombing the enemy's runways first, and dogfighting is much less important than being able to strike an airfield with standoff missiles. The great argument in World War II that's still being raged between angry tankies and angry airmen is that the Royal Air Force in the desert concentrated on bombing the fuel depots of Rommel's tanks instead of bombing the tanks as they were attacking the infantry.
What defeated Rommel? Lack of fuel.
Yeah, so the RAF claims with some merit that their strategy of attacking the fuel dumps was a superior strategy, but if you're in the trench and there's a tank coming at you and you can see your aircraft flying overhead and not engaging the tank, you can see how that builds up bitterness.
Oh yeah.
So, these things go on. So that's my rundown of the service history of the AMX13. You got anything else?
Look, each of those different places, as I said, a lot of mercenary activities and bush wars in Africa, and it would have had an influence in a lot of those places. But what I really loved about it was how in any of these places where revolutions have happened or the colonials have been kicked out, you would see, especially in Lebanon, it was one of my favourites, that at the end of one of the Lebanese factions there's like 6 different militias that have AMX13s running around in Lebanon. And at the end of it, they said, let's give them all up to make actually a peace process. And then they dumped them all at sea. So it's... that
would be a hell of a dive reef.
It was... But like... Every side in all these factions, the things, it wasn't a case of there was just one actor in the conflict or these civil wars. There was 6, and they each one of them had a couple of AMX13s running around for them. And you think to yourself, how crazy would that be? This is the tank that's going out there and it's being used in all these little places that the French are pulling out of or getting kicked out of.
Yeah,
on both sides of the conflict, whether it's the French government, the Foreign Legion, mercenaries hired by the French government, versus whatever militias have raised up in these places to get rid of the French.
Yeah, there's... Sorry, I've just lost my train of thought there.
Must have been taken out by a British bomber.
Yeah, it could be. No, you've got this thing where if you are an insurgent and all you've got is an AK-47 and no one in your squad or your band or your group has anything heavier than an AK-47, then an AMX13 will ruin your day. You've got no option but to fall back, unless you've got to...
And you've got to fall back fast because it's going 60 km.
60 kilometres an hour, yeah, and you're falling back on foot, so it's going to ruin your day, is basically where we're at. Having said that, almost no insurgencies, since the 1980s at least, are equipped solely with small arms. Your standard in certainly the Chechen War, and I believe insurgents the world over have used that as their base, is you generally have 2 RPG men for every rifleman. The rifleman is there to protect the RPG men. So the anti-armour capability of your average insurgency, because governments always deploy armour against insurgents, has come a long way. And light tanks, even Leopards, which no one would normally consider a light tank, but they're a little on the...
They're a medium tank.
They're on the light side of the Iron Triangle, though. Their armour is not their the big thing about a Leopard. They tend to focus on their speed and their gun.
Yeah.
Leopards have been terribly mauled in Syria.
Yes.
So my point is, and again, I guess this is one of the things that in 1946, when they started developing the AMX, very few insurgent groups had anti-tank weapons, and in 2019, you basically don't start an insurgency unless you've got some way of dealing with, or at least harassing enemy armour.
Correct. And it won't stand up to landmines, it won't stand up to IEDs, it won't stand up to RPG-7s or anything like that. But back when it was designed in the 50s, 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, it was around, and all these places were going through transitions as both factions of the Cold War were saying, yes, we want to maintain this right-wing dictatorship government and keep the people oppressed, so we're going to flood in a bunch of support. And that might be by the French, or it might be by somebody else, somebody deniable, like Iran or Contra or the Nicaraguan Contra people. Anyway, but these tanks were available, they were out there, and because they were French, I guess there was lots of plausible deniability of being able to say that, yep, it's the French's fault rather than any other operatives might be involved in their situations. And they're, look, commonly available, cheap, reliable.
I get the sense, and I haven't actually seen any discussion of it, there was a switch in the models. They started with a petrol engine, and later models had a diesel engine. But they must have been relatively easy to work on because they kept rumbling along in service in bush armies.
Correct. And you got the... it's just a heavy diesel engine. Heavy diesel engine is the way you go, but the chassis is common to whatever type it is. It's just whatever turret you're sticking on top of it, and because it's small, low maintenance, heavy diesel engine, if it's got whatever turret you've got on it, that's what you've got. And
I do wonder, because there's rubber skirt that creates the clamshell.
Yes.
That must wear out quite fast, and I'd love to see more on how bush armies and third worlders went with maintaining that. I suspect they just replaced it with a piece of canvas and painted the whole thing green. But
that's what I would have thought, because it's your hydraulics inside of it that are actually moving around. So you're not relying on the rubber bushes to keep them separated.
No, it's just keeping the dust out more than anything.
Yeah, exactly right. So. But yeah, running around in bush wars, once your rubber dries out and you're having to pull that out because to stop it getting gummed up, I'll be whacking some canvas over the top, painting it and keeping the dust out that way. Yeah.
And it's one of those funny things. We think of tanks as these solid steel constructions, but there's always bits of rubber and cloth and, turning up in funny places. Even the gun shrouds on battleships often had big chunks of canvas keeping the weather out of the turrets. Anyway, it's time for a new feature of this podcast.
This
podcast. Beer review! So, Rob and I years ago did a rugby podcast, which weirdly got picked up on Argentine radio.
Where the AMX13 is also produced under license from the French for many years.
Hello, Argentina.
Up until 1987.
We were the kings of 4 a.m. in Buenos Aires. Now, we did a beer review in that, and then I spent 4 years working in the beer industry. And now we are reviewing... What have we got here, Rob?
We got the Cayandra Golden Ale from Jindabyne.
Jindabyne Brewing Co. And this is something I always wanted to do when I was working in brewing. It's a plain aluminium can. Nice size one. What's the capacity on this?
I can't actually see.
Looks bigger than a normal can to me.
440 mils.
Yeah, 440. So it's a tall boy. And then they put a beautiful, and it is, I mean that in all seriousness, a beautiful printed label wraparound. And it's just such an easy way to make cans instead of getting a full can print and then having can blanks piled literally the ceiling of your warehouse waiting to be filled and hoping horrible things don't crawl into them.
With the experience that you've got.
I speak with some bitter experience on that point. Yeah. Although I would note that any canning run should have a rinse phase for the cans before the beer goes in, and you hope that the spiders will be dislodged in the rinse.
Well, you do know that Ben Spoke's now making beer out of crickets, and what was the other one? Some sort of
black soldier fly larva.
There you go. You go. So they're incorporating this process into their
yeah. Just whatever's crawled into the can while it's sitting in the warehouse. I do not. Not at all in any way suggesting that is happening with Ben Spoke Beers. Quality control is always been paramount in my time at the company. Anyway, so this is a Golden Ale, which is a style of beer that had a brief renaissance 10 years ago in Australia and has really fallen out of favour in general in the industry. Companies that had Golden Ales when they launched 5 years ago are killing them off because they really struggle to sell them. And I think that's just because it's got a very heavy malt backbone to a Golden Ale. This one's got a nice little hop ring to it as well, but everyone wants more hops and less malt in their beers at the moment, so Golden Ales are slightly out of fashion at the moment. But this is a lovely drinking beer.
It is. So the little man at my local shops was standing out the front as I was riding home on Friday afternoon, handing out free tastings. So I said, right, I need a beer for a beer review, and somebody's giving me beer, so I'm going to go inside and buy a couple of cans so that we can talk about them. Look, it's Golden Ale. It's fresh. It's very refreshing on a hot, stinking hot, still spring day. Even though
39 degrees spring days. For Americans, that's 39 degrees centigrade, which is very close to 100, I believe.
Over 100.
30, yeah.
Yeah, it's over 100. No, so it's not over.
Around 40's 100, yeah.
Ah.
Anyway, it's too hot.
It's too hot for spring.
It's too hot for any time. Humans aren't meant to live in these conditions.
I was about to say, it's one of the reasons why I like living in Canberra, is that we don't get too hot. But over the last 3 years, it really hasn't been the case. It's been stinking hot.
Thank you, coal industry. This weather brought to you by Big Coal. So, Cayandra...
Golden Ale.
Yeah, Golden Ale. Now, Cayandra...
they're up in the mountains of Australia, so...
Yeah, the Wigan Pen, which was a little Canberra brewery, used to have a Cayandra Kolsch for many years, that they've gone out of business last year. So is Cayandra a mountain?
Yes, it's a town up in the mountains.
Okay.
And look, those areas were settled in the gold rush of the 1860s.
I didn't know they had gold up there.
Oh yeah, it's I think it's out past. I want to say it's out past Selwyn, just south of Canberra, but it's a long drive to get there. I took my little girl to the Selwyn snowfields this year, and absolutely beautiful seeing where when you go to Jindabyne, not Jindabyne, Thredbo and Perishing, all you see is a mountain. When I go to Selwyn, the plains were all covered in snow, and it was absolutely beautiful. Yeah, and that's what looks very similar to this. It's one of the oldest snow towns in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Happy with the beer. It's a beautiful beer for a hot day.
Now, given that most of our listeners are American, it is unlikely you are ever going to see anything from Jindabyne Brewing because beer is unbelievably expensive to ship internationally.
I think they're also just making a start in the industry, and one of the big selling points is it is very clean water up there.
It's full of Giardia as well, mind you, but I would assume they filtered it out.
I'm hoping so.
The beer-making process, with its extensive boiling, and that's one of the reasons why beer exists in society for so long, should deal with that issue anyway. But yes.
So if you and just remember, don't go shooting with Donny Rumsfeld up there. That's where he likes to go up past. That's where he likes to go.
He goes fly fishing up there, does he?
Yep, and hunting. I thought isn't that where he shot somebody?
No. That was. I was in the States where he shot the...
okay. Anyway.
Yeah, it was Dick Cheney who shot the...
that's the one, sorry.
The judge, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld do indeed love to go fly fishing up in the Australian Snowy Mountains. It's
and that's around Cayandra.
Yeah. So don't hold that against it. It's you know what, in this world of wacky craft beers, I for one love to just come across a clean, crisp, fun to drink. Yeah. Well done, Jindabyne Brewing Co.
Thank you.
Cayendra Golden Ale. It's a I'm going to give it a solid 4 stars.
Sounds good to me.
Mm. Now I want to talk just briefly to finish up why light tanks are a bad idea. We've sort of touched on this, but there's a similar thing happens at sea with battle cruisers.
Battle cruisers or heavy cruisers?
No, battle cruisers.
Right,
okay. So you take the weight of a battleship, you take armour off, you put engines in, you've still got battleship main armament, 12 to 16 inch guns. I don't think any battle cruisers ever had 16 inches, so let's say 12 to 15.
That's the Japanese, they would have outgunned them.
Yeah, I think even the Congos were 15 inches though. So 12 to 15 inch main armour, big guns, exactly the same size as the battleship, just
faster and less
armoured. Yeah, and every time, even trained admirals who should know better, who should know that these are cruisers, hunters, that these are at best heavy scouts.
You don't put them in the line. You send them off to the far side of the world, and you make somebody's life miserable in Argentina.
Or, frankly, Australia bought one battle cruiser, oddly enough called the HMAS Australia, which
sank?
No, did not. Well, it was scuttled in the end off Sydney Heads, burning as part of the peace treaties. The point was, it actually succeeded brilliantly in its role, which was to act as a fast core of a cruiser squadron, put a bit of heavy steel into that cruiser squadron, and chased the German Asiatic fleet out of the Pacific to meet its fate off the Falkland Islands. So, battle cruisers can, when used according to their doctrine and design, be very effective and useful. Questionable as to whether they're actually a good use of the resources, but different question.
But sending them to the far side of the world, it's which you can do with ships.
Yeah.
And if it's a total war situation around their planet, is really being able to. It's really useful to be able to threaten whatever part of the enemy's empire, home countries, whatever that the battle's not being fought in.
The problem happens though that even admirals who should know better can't resist using them in the battle line.
Because they've got great big guns, and I need some extra guns.
And they're there, and also their speed means they're fast enough to get to where the problem is, which is why they then blow up and kill thousands of men. I don't mean to sound too lighthearted. God rest the souls of those brave sailors. But, at Jutland, I think 3 battle cruisers blew up. Now, yes, there were problems with their ammunition handling, but that also came to speed and usage and beyond the scope of this podcast. The point was, the battle cruisers blew up. World War II, they sent the Hood to engage the Bismarck. Hood blew up. Now, again, yes, you can say, but it was a lucky shot and all these things. And I've made those arguments as well. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, the battle cruisers sent to fight battleships blow up and kill everyone. And that is not a desirable characteristic. Similarly, for a force of Israeli armour in the Six-Day War to be so badly mauled that they immediately sold the tank suggests they did not like the results of using their tanks.
No, they wanted something heavier armoured. It's not a tank for taking on other main battle tanks.
Yeah, but the problem is, because it looks like a tank, when push comes to shove, every commanding officer, let's not even say generals, but anyone in charge is, when push comes to shove, going to send these things into situations where they will kill their crews.
Which is why, if you have good doctrine and you actually follow it, and you have other options, and sometimes, you know what? You got to send troops out to die. It's not fun. It's not what anybody wants to do. But if that's what the situation calls for, you got to stop the Syrian advance down the highway. Yeah, send off your 3 AMX13, set up an ambush in that town, and block that road.
Yeah, but they don't get beaten in threes. They get beaten in battalion-sized groupings of 300-400 of these things. It happened in the Indo-Pakistan War of '65, and again, that's a war that went pretty well for the Indians, except where their AMXs got obliterated. 6-Day War is generally, if a war was only 6 days long, because the Israelis ran out of fuel chasing the
and rounds.
Yeah,
because nobody would sell them anymore, so that's as far as they could get.
Yeah, but the point was, even in wars that went unbelievably well, the AMX13 was a shining disaster.
So it's good for police actions, is what I want to say.
Yeah, but again, it comes down to would you be better off just putting a rocket launcher on a Hilux?
Your crew probably wouldn't feel as good about that.
But you can go to any...
Unless you've got them really hopped up on gat or your amphetamines, whatever else.
Let's not mock tankers on amphetamines. The old tank chocolate kept a lot of tankers warm and awake. Yeah, look, I just, it comes down to when there is such a consistent record of being unable to be used properly, I question the value of the format.
I've got no dramas with that. It was built for World War II. It came 10 years after that.
Yeah, why would you start designing a tank for World War II after World War II?
Because that's what the French were doing. All right, they still sold 7,700 of these things around the world. Lots of people using them for... been adapted over time. Look, it's not the best tank, but it's cheap, adaptable, fast, and it's got a great big gun on it. So you can do lots of things. And yes, you'll probably lose 3-man crews at a time.
Yeah.
And if the natives who you are fighting don't have any heavy weapons or IEDs or anything else, then you're probably going to be able to achieve a lot.
Yeah, I would say that...
as long as there's a nice road between where you're trying to get to.
155mm shells that aren't serviceable for artillery use are...
Not every country is Iraq, okay?
And also the internet just means that the nerds of any insurgency can look up a lot of very interesting information. And I don't think there's a place anymore to build from scratch something like this, because for a start, like you said, the infantry fighting vehicles are basically filling this role. And when you can strap 1 or 2 anti-tank missiles onto the side of them to give them an anti-tank punch, and also, if you've got a squad with a couple of...
it's portholes. I need portholes.
Yeah, so they can shoot out the side. Pew, pew, pew.
Anybody who was wondering, that's back to Pentagon Wars. So
yes, which was required listening for you all. Anyhow, I think we're just about done on the AMX13.
It's not a tank for the future, but it was a very interesting tank for its time.
And it did also pioneer the autoloader, which could well... is still probably the future of tanks.
Not good. Who wants to be lugging around a 40-kilo 125? In fact... is that one of the reasons why we only get up to, 125 rounds?
Well, 120mm is the biggest hand-loaded.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. I think, definitely, as they get bigger, because basically every millimetre... the difference between a 76mm shell and a 75mm shell is huge. Literally, you can look up that comparison on the internet right now, and even that 1mm difference, admittedly, it's a specific 76, but... It's enormous, and every millimetre you add is not just that 1% increase in size. It's a cubic function, and they also tend to get longer and longer. You had an issue with naval battles that a 16-inch shell was just about manhandleable, kind of, sorta. The things weighed a ton, but they sort of got rolled on their edges. And there was some manhandling of them, particularly on American battleships, where they literally recruited really big, strong guys. But for the Japanese there's no Japanese born who could handle shells that size, so they automated, and similarly, if you accept that the future of tanks is with autoloaders, and I think most people think that's the case. The AMX is the first tank with an autoloader, which means the future is the children of the AMX.
And now we've ticked off a French tank.
We have, which has spared us having to talk about Char Bs and Samuas. So that we've really done ourselves well there. Thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, do please like, share, subscribe. Tell your friends.
Love those words, like, share, subscribe.
Yeah, they're good words, and you should do it. Do please, give us 5-star reviews on any service you're listening to.
Listen in, and if anybody's driven an AMX13, let us know.
Awesome.